now. We are learning about AWOs. Woohoo! We have done a previous training, I think, Jack, that you were a part of sometime last year. So this will feel like a refresher for you. We'll discuss maybe some potential changes that we may like to make. But for the newbies, it's be our first time, so we're going to run through.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So we're going to talk about additional work orders and options to contract, all in one. This will also include what an unforeseen is, everything that would be considered under the AWO category that we have to account for, okay? So first things first, what is an AWO? Anybody?
It's a change order, additional work order, what you want to call it.
Yes, it's short for additional work order, same thing as a change order, same thing as an addendum, anything that is different from what is in the contract scope. We use an AWO because it documents that change. We use AWOs, as we know, throughout the duration of the project. It's very, very rare that we have an AWO prior to contract signing, but sometimes that can happen. For the most part, the AWOs happen after CA through the end of the project. So any changes that are happening that are different from what the client signed, it'll all get documented in there so that we know what it is. How do we process AWOs? We'll go into more details on that, but we all know that they're done in co-construct, which is really convenient because the clients have access to it. We have access to it, so we can easily post it. Everyone can see it and they can go approve it, and we get that information right away. So that's pretty cool. AWOs allow us to easily track all of the contract changes. We know that our projects are very customized, so there are a lot of moving pieces and parts to each of our contracts. It's very important that we're all in the know of what's changing as we go so that there's no confusion, right? It also helps for warranty purposes. It helps us to track down what we actually did, what's actually covered under warranty, who did that work, are we obligated to go fix it or are we not? Things of that nature. It helps us to track. We have a general rule that AWOs absolutely should be approved before we commence with the work. It protects us and that protects the client, because a lot of things can happen from between a verbal conversation and the work actually getting done or the time for payment. So there are times when clients have in the past given a verbal saying, yes, I know that's a change order, proceed with that. And then we spend the dollars to order materials or spend the labor on that work. And then after the fact, the client says, I'm not paying for that. And we have no way to collect on it because we don't have that documented. That's always an issue that we want to stay away from. The general rule is to please make sure that the AWOs are approved by all parties before work commences. Now, we know there are extenuating circumstances where it's like, we need this to happen right now. The parties are here. Say the electrician is working currently. This needs to be included in his rough-in and he's not coming back tomorrow. On those things, those are case by case. Discuss it with your DOP, obviously, but for the most part, we want to make sure that AWOs are approved. Okay.
Okay.
Next, changes that do not affect the contract price, we still have to get AWOs for them. It's really, really important. I think this is one of the areas that we miss just because we're not charging the client for the change or the work that we're doing. We just assume that we don't have to document it. It's important for a number of reasons. Again, we want to track what exactly we did in the event that there is a warranty that we have to go back to. We want to track exactly what it is we did. Second, it's good to document those things so the client can see where we've gone above and beyond for them. So where we said, hey, look, we could have charged you for this work, but as a courtesy for client satisfaction, we did it for free at no cost, and they can see where we've gone above and beyond for them. It's also can be used for leverage if there are other things that come up in the future where the client is asking for credit because we've made a mistake or something has happened, we can say, hey, we've already, given you X, Y, and Z work at no cost. So we've been able to keep our part and do some stuff for you for free. So it's a negotiating tool that we can use. So it's really important to document that. Any changes with a credit back to the client, we all know that still needs to be in an AWO. It's going to be for a negative amount of dollars that we owe back to the client, assuming we're removing some scope from the general scope, then we know it's a credit back to the client. We want to put that in an AWO as well. Accounting gets that information and it gets tallied into the total cost that's owed to us by the client at the end. The other big thing that we use AWOs for is to clarify any ambiguities on the contract. So things that are not very clear, anything that's gray. So we want things to be specific so that the client understands it, we understand it, and everybody knows what it is that we're doing. In the event that we've somehow put something in there that seems like a gray area, we want to clarify that. And the way that we would do that is to do an AWO. Of course, that would
we have a lot of those clarification AWOs that take place. Elizabeth and I are working on one now for Bolton Smith. We do a lot of those right at contract because the client has like just questions about the contract, and it's just to clarify the contract. It ends up to be a no charge clarificational additional work order, just so everybody's on the same page of what's moving forward.
Correct. Absolutely. All right. Point number 2. For what reasons would we need AWOs? I think we've gone over most of them, but usually we find that 5% of the time we have to do an AWO because the county inspector, reviewer, jurisdiction requests that we make a change. It could be something code related. So we might get to the point where we're actually doing an inspection and the inspector says, well, I want you to route that differently because per code, this is what needs to happen. In the event that that's going to cost us additional, like there's additional labor associated with doing that work and even materials, that would be a change order that we need to discuss with the client, saying, hey, the county is requesting that this is done according to code, and then we would have to go to get it.
Regardless if there's extra labor and materials, if the county's asking us to do something, in general, you touched upon it, like an additional work order is an addendum and it clarifies what we're performing. So if the county's asking us to perform something different, we at least need to get that in writing that we're doing something different, whether there's dollars attached or not.
Very valid point. Any change at all, and document it. The question that I think some of the PMs are thinking, and I'll pose that question at Ozib. Ozib, what if an inspector says that we need to make a change that's not in our contract scope? And we go to a client for an additional work order and the client pushes back and says, well, you should have known this information because it's code. Therefore, I don't feel like I should pay for it. Is that a valid AWO charge or not? What do you think?
No.
It's not a valid AWO charge?
No.
How so?
Because that is something we should have known before, putting in the drawings or details, whatever we submitted for the county.
Okay. So I think different project managers process that differently. So I'm glad we're having the conversation about it. The way that I think about it is that would have been something that if we knew or if we thought about ahead of time, we would have charged the client for. Is that correct?
Yes.
So just like with anything that we miss, usually what we do is we try to go to the client. If we've missed some scope, right, from the beginning, we try to go to the client to say, hey, look, this was our bad. We're owning the fact that we missed it, but we didn't charge you for it. So we still would have charged you for it at the beginning. We just didn't because we missed it. I would still go back to try to get that cost from the client.
And it gets into a gray area, so I guess it determines on really what it is.
It depends on the cost, whatever, that AW is for.
Well, not even the cost, but it's the principle of it. So, I mean, staying back on track with this agenda,
Mhm.
we did some historical data, and that's why about 5% of our additional work orders are requested by the county. And then 5 are actually unforeseens where we would get in and we would open it up and it sees something different. And
Mhm.
then 90% are client enhancements. And that's
Right.
why we changed the vernacular from change orders to additional work orders, because 90% is additional work from clients.
Mhm.
Is this the time where you want to talk, Salima, about the unforeseens and everything like that, or do you have a different part of the agenda that you want to talk about that?
Nope, or you can talk about it right here.
Okay, so in general, it's going to come down to what is an unforeseen, and that's a lot of times what's tricky to talk about with the client, because no matter what, was it an unforeseen? Should we have known? Should we have not have known? Even if we knew, should that have been included, not included? Yes, no, maybe. So that's where it becomes gray, and we need to make sure that we come in with the right strategy, because it potentially is a high stress situation for the client. In terms of unforeseens, really what an additional work order is, to clarify, is what's in the contract and what's not in the contract.
Mhm.
So is it in the contract? If it's not in the contract, then it's an additional work order. So if it's not in the contract to do, whether we should have had it or not, and now the client wants us to have it in, or the jurisdiction wants to have it in the contract, there should be an additional work order done to it. Now, if the strategy would put bad taste in the client's mouth because we 100,000% should have known about it, well, then the strategy on the presentation of that additional work order is a little different. But if there's some sort of gray area that's on there where, yes, it could have went this way and it could have went that way, and this is how we put it in because we were hoping that the clients wouldn't have to pay that additional fee, and we were hoping that the jurisdiction saw it in our point of view, and in the end the jurisdiction said no, we have to do it this way. Well, then we got to go back to the client and say we tried to make it the less expensive version, but now the jurisdiction, the county wants it at this scenario, and if that's the case, then we got to charge that additional work order.
Andrew,
That's
let me comment. I personally think that production managers should not be explaining this to the client unless there's something in the contract that covers this situation, that the county may or may not require additional work, and it is not included in this contract, because by the time production gets these, the clients are already either stressed out because it took too long in design, or there were mistakes, or this, that, and the other thing. And it's just one more thing that we as project managers would have to bring to the client, trying to get more money out of them. But if we had some verbiage in the original contract that stated something that basically this could or could not happen, it is not included in the contract. If it does, expect an additional work order, and just something more, something up front that gives us leverage against any argument they may have, because it would eliminate a lot of the strategy that we would have to talk about if we go in knowing that if the county does call out something, or we run in, like for instance, pipes running through the wall that we could not possibly have known about, going to a second floor bathroom when we take out a wall, if there would be something in that contract that would say that under plumbing or under demo, we would feel so much better talking to the client.
I agree with you in principle on the whole thing, but it would be impossible to put every scenario of potentials that could take place. But if we had a better global item that was just around each item, right? And to say, we put in the package specifically, because we do have something in our general conditions that addresses this globally, but I think if we had a separate breakout for that,
something that they initial, something that they have to read. I mean, you
sign off on the contract, so
but
we have them sign off on each page of the contract.
Well, I don't know if Mark ever showed you my contract, but it's no bigger than really yours, and there are a lot of caveats in there that protected my rear end throughout my career, and I'm just saying it makes it a hell of a lot easier than,
But I totally hear what you're saying, and we definitely. So I'm sure Salim was making a note to have that in there, but I don't necessarily agree with like if a client initials every page and signs every page of a contract, but
We're
they
still
didn't
gonna-
initial next to a specific line item, that we can't hold them accountable to the contract because it wasn't next to that. That's where I disagree with you, but I agree with everything else in principle.
well, I mean that I can point back to the fact that they recognized that this could possibly happen.
Yeah, without a doubt. If there's that clause in the contract, just like you're describing, and then there's initials that they have on the bottom of that page, which is essentially what, how all, home purchases and everything would take place.
Right.
And you're responsible for everything you just initialed on that page.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And we can make some adjustments to make sure that we feel more confident in that. But you are correct. No matter what, it's going to be a stressful situation. We have already removed them from parts of their house and demoed their kitchen or their rear walls open. It's already a stressful environment for the client.
Right.
But do not be bashful in general to do zero charge additional work orders. Just to clarify, as an example, Elizabeth and I are working on a client's contract right now, and we were going to cut a small thing. We were going to cut vents into an existing door for the utility room to do passive airflow from the utility room to the main area. And now the client wants to pull and replace a door, and he'll supply the door, right? So we think that's going to end up to be a wash in terms of labor materials of what we were doing. So in the end, we still need to document that instead of doing the one scope, we're doing the other scope. So don't be bashful about just doing those clarifications.
Oh, I'm not worried about those. I'm more worried about the unforeseen things that a client could say, yeah, with you being in business for 35 years, you should know that stuff.
Yeah, but that could be their stance for anything. And that's why we need to kind of go through. So in some of the examples that I have, of what we went through over the past year, we went in through a project, and the only spot to access, we were doing a whole new floor all the way across a client's first floor, which is all going to be hardwoods. It was going to be engineering, floating floor over a slab. We need to break up that slab to access the main sewer line to connect our new kitchen. The only spot to actually connect it, though, was in the floor of a bathroom that we weren't touching.
Yes.
So in the end, we had to break up that tile in that floor to access that sewer line, and we did not do an additional work order for that.
Right.
But in the end, anywhere else on that whole first floor, when the sewer line finally got determined, then we could have done that. The client took the stance of, you should have known where the sewer line was. Well, we didn't know the sewer line until we started breaking up and seeing where it was. So that should have been an unforeseen to have to demo and reinstall that floor. In that same example, that slab was 7 inches thick. So the unforeseens a lot of times have to go with like, what is normal construction? And that's what's sometimes tough, is what's typical, what's a standard construction. And we always have to then go benchmark standard.
Right.
And a lot of times those individual items need to be game planned behind the scenes. Would anybody here think that a 7-inch slab would be standard? Right? No, because a standard slab is going to be a 4-inch slab, and we go through, but it required so much extra demo and hauling of that material and then patching that it took a couple extra days to do all that work to tie the sewer line together.
Right.
But we did not do an additional work order for that example because that just wasn't identified on site when we were doing the work as a unforeseen, but it should have been. A third example that I'm going to pull just for conversational purposes is another floor demo that we did on a kitchen project. The whole entire kitchen floor, which we converted from tile to hardwoods, was laid with Ditra. Grunt. So if anybody knows how you install Ditra, so what we had to do is it's a very, very upgraded tile install that came standard with the house build because it was a relatively new house. And we did not know that it was there. So when we started pulling it up, then it's all that underlayment that gets put down there. And then we spent 2 extra days sanding the floor down enough to convert it from, down to the subfloor in order to convert it over to the hardwoods. So that should have been an unforeseen because the flooring company that did that, charged us for it, but we missed that opportunity for that discussion with the client.
Mhm.
Right.
You never would have thought that Deetra would have put down, maybe in a bathroom, but even that would be an unforeseen. But to be in the kitchen floor, no one would expect that. So it took an extra two extra days of demo to remove that floor. Are there any other examples of unforeseens that you all would like to talk about?
I think materials is a huge opportunity that we miss, even prior to the COVID clause. If we ever went into a project where we're ending up spending 2 or 3 times more than we anticipated the cost of materials, we've never gone back to the client to say, hey, this is an unforeseen, because we just assumed, well, material costs, we eat it.
Now, I assume that you're making the assumption that we're getting the exact same materials and it's just a material escalation on that.
Correct. Material escalation.
So what's the protocol then? So what's the protocol if we go and we think we see an unforeseen, Oz is on site, the guys start to remove the floor, it's set, it's Deetra set floor. What's the next steps? What happens?
What's next, Oz?
Next would be, just talk to client first of all and let him know about this thing, that this was something, unknown or was never known before. So we got to fix that. And, just talk about the remedy, whatever, we can do to fix that. They are on the same page as if we are, and then just negotiate the price.
So is the standard practice then that the PM would work with the PD just to put together that additional work order and
Yes.
Post that to the client?
Yes.
Yes, I think a conversation happens with the client first, so they're not blindsided.
Yes.
A lot of times it's good to show them what's happening. Like if the area is still open, you can, or if there's pictures, you can. The reason I say that, I'm thinking about like plywood replacement, like when we do like roofing and things like that. That's another missed opportunity. I think that's on the contract that we do let the clients know that if there's rotted plywood that needs to be replaced, there'll be additional cost. But it's rare that we go back to get that from them. It's nice to have pictures like, hey, we have to do a few sheets here. This is the additional cost. So I think
It's always good to have that conversation with the client first before, going back to the production department and let everyone know so that they know that this is coming.
yes, usually we have a verbal conversation. At that point, we know the price. So we have a verbal conversation, let them know what the cost is. The clients say, okay, so then they're expecting that AWO when it's posted.
And we know that the majority of those unforeseens typically take place, I think that's what Jack was alluding to, is either at permit review, at inspections, or during demo, right? That's the bulk of these that take place.
Yes.
So I would agree with Jack. So maybe we either put them globally as not included or in those specific categories under planning on the contract or under demo.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but Salima, where we would put that category with what happened at Trask, I don't see any category like in ABC thing, what happened at Trask in terms of that price hike in lumber.
So we have a COVID clause on our contract. So if you look at the contract, you'll see that there's a COVID clause there that's saying that if there's a...
That I know, but where that thing covers in our categories, the need for AWOs typically arise for following reasons.
That would be an unforeseen, the material cost hike. That's an unforeseen. There's
Okay.
no way that you would have seen that from the time we signed the contract to when we actually purchased the materials, the hike. Now, we prep the clients for it because we know the climate we're in and what's going on. So we prep them, there's a chance, because we know those prices are just fluctuating. So we prep them in case that happens, but that's an unforeseen.
But if that was already part of the contract and there was a clause, you know, for example, COVID, but
Mhm.
it's not unforeseen. It was something which was known before.
Well, when COVID came out, we had such a crazy spike of material costs that I think that all the vendors went from, I might have to rely on UPDs, that they were validating or keeping their quotes valid for like 2
30
months or
days.
something
Yeah.
like that. And then it went down to like a couple weeks.
Mhm.
I don't know the specifics on that, but that's about what it was.
It became the norm for 10 days.
10 days norm. And
Mhm.
so whatever we were quoting the clients then was not going to be accurate. And so specifically with the COVID clause, we added the clause, and in this particular case, like in Jack's example, they initial that. They know that that's one item that they know could take place. And we also added mandatorily at the executive summary to prepare them to say, this is a big deal. Like, we're experiencing spikes of material costs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So is
that
that
client had been prepared, you know, at the contract signing, they actually specifically signed off on it, that line item on the contract. So we've set the table accordingly. It's a terrible situation, because no matter what, you're going to come in and we need to ask for more money because the materials went up, and the clients are not, I mean, they're not tickled pink about that, you know?
Yeah, they're not going to be happy regardless. So as it is, not that they're blindsided, sales preps them with the information so they know, and then they know what's happening in the current climate. This is a temporary situation. Nobody expected COVID. It's not going to be like this forever, but we do prep them for that. That's a potential that could happen. Okay. Any other questions about unforeseens, examples you want to ask about, gray areas? Let's talk about it now.
I was just thinking about this latest, you know, exhaust fan thing that happened at Trask. Where would we put that one? Probably.
So what happened with the exhaust fan? I just saw a message come in saying order another, but you know we wouldn't do that without an AWO. So what was the deal there?
The deal is that, you know, I'll talk to Jennifer tomorrow and let her know that we need 3 rather than 2, because we ordered 2 at that time because didn't know about that we would need 3. But as per code, we need 3.
So there's one bathroom that maybe has like a separate water
Toilet.
closet that needs 2 separate fans.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we explained the protocol. This is a great example. Thank you. This is awesome. So Oz, you did it well. You explained the protocol. Like, listen, if you see an unforeseen, then PM's on site. Of course, gives a heads up to the client that something may happen. Work with the PD. Work up that additional work order that has to get obviously ratified as quickly as possible, so we can order materials or pay trades to do extra work or whatever. Then the other scenario is, what if it is like this questionable gray area? Is it a charge to the client, or is it something we should have saw? So let's explain what the protocol would be when it's not cut and dry. So maybe Salima, maybe you explain what that protocol is.
The protocol, when it's not cut and dry, can go different ways. It just depends on what it is and the client. So my approach is usually to be upfront with the client first and foremost. Something comes up, I'm usually having a conversation with the client just to let them know, hey, we ran into this situation. I may not have all the answers for the client at that moment in time, but I'm letting the client know, hey, we ran into this situation. Looks like it's going to be an additional work order because this was not originally planned for blah, 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 blah. Now, at that point, I'm checking the client's temperature, because some of them might start to push back and say, well, no, you should have known about that, or I'm not paying for it because it's a firm fixed price, and, you know, things of that nature. So my approach is always to talk to the client first, see what their temperature is, and then case by case. If it is not a major deal, so it's a huge project, this client is going to give us a good referral. We've been doing well so far. This is the one thing that's going to put a bad taste in the client's mouth, and it's not like a huge cost. That's discretionary. Like I would make the decision if I want to waive the cost and do something nice for the client and move forward. But if it's a significant cost, I think I'm going to attempt to collect on that additional work order.
But again, it varies from client to client. Sometimes you have clients, whose temperature is always high.
Yes. Yes.
It never goes down.
Yes.
It's
It's
part of the challenge, and that's why brainstorming and coming up with the right strategy is super important.
I don't think there's a one size fits all for that kind of situation. I think it boils down to relationship with the client. I think the PM will take the first stab at it. And there's times when we're like, hey, we're not backing down on this point. Like we want to hold the client to the contract, and then you have to pull in the DOP. There's other times when it's not worth the fight because it's $50, whatever it is. You want to keep the client happy. You move on. I think it's
The first step is to include the DOP, and then you would go to sales or design or pull in someone else if you had a question about it.
yes,
Okay.
that would be correct.
Okay.
Is there anything else we want to talk about for unforeseens?
No,
Okay. And then of course we know what client enhancements are, right? The client requested the change. That's pretty straightforward. They know the deal. We quote them a price. They say yay or nay. We move forward or they decline, right? So that one's easy. The rest of this is just going to be how to prep an AWO, how to document the change so that it's reaching all the departments and everybody involved knows that the change happens and it gets to the right people. So if you have any questions about unforeseens still, please stop me, but I'm going to move forward so that we can keep to the time.
Yep, keep going.
All right. So prepping for an AWO. We use the options to contract file, which is in the client folder. Has everybody seen that file? Do I need to pull it up? Is everyone familiar with it? Everybody is. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
just to note that is a estimate file.
Right, it is. It is in the estimating folder. Usually the PDs are the ones that add to that file, but it's good for the PMs to know where it is just in case they need to look up information. It's in there. So what we do when we're prepping for the AWO, the PMs and the PDs work close together. So the PM is responsible for getting the scope of what needs to be done for the additional work to the PD, material, labor, all of that. The PD is going to plug it in to our options to contract template to help us spit out with our markup and everything, spit up what we need to charge the client. Because the PM is probably feeding the PD hard costs. They have to do all the math to get out, well, this is what we're going to charge the client. The PD can start in that file themselves if the PM gives them a heads up like, hey, this is what we need to do. You might need to get a quote from, say, a trade. They can start with the information they already know. So what we ask them to do is go ahead and plug in the information you already know. And then anything you're waiting on, just highlight those cells in yellow. So at least we know that that started. And then once you have the quotes you're waiting on, you plug them in, you're good to go. So you fill that information in that file. The PM will verify that the scope is accurate. PD puts all the numbers together. And then the PM is going to have a conversation with the client, just giving them a heads up like, hey, this is what this AWO is going to cost. We're going to post it today. Client says, yeah, the PD will post it for them to approve. On the credits, just want to make a quick note about that. That one is very iffy because we want to make sure that we don't credit back more than we should. So there's an additional step for the PDs that if it's a credit back to the client, just to double check the estimate and make sure that we're not giving back more money to the client than is in the estimate. Very important. It has happened before. I kid you not, Mallard. So just please make sure you're double checking that so that we don't make any errors there. So any questions on prepping the options to contract for the AWO?
No.
Okay, great. Creating the AWO in CoConstruct is pretty straightforward, but I'll just walk you through it. You want to go into CoConstruct. I have pictures here, and you can look at this file later and see the pictures. CoConstruct has changed a little bit, so this page looks slightly different, but it's the same concept. You go to the change order page, you hit start, a new change order, and then you start to fill in the blank fields. The first thing you want to do is you want to put a title in for the AWO, and you want it to be, you want it to follow whatever number the last AWO was. So if the last AWO you posted was AWO number 3, then the title of this one would be AWO number 4. If you haven't had any AWOs for this client, obviously the number of this one would be AWO number 1. And then the title should state like a brief description of what the change is. So shower door replacement or whatever it needs to be. Then in the body of the AWO, you want to be as descriptive as possible. If there are parts related with this, you want to put the make, model, things like that in the description. You want to be as clear as you possibly can, because this is a legally binding contract. So don't be as vague as like 2 doors. You want to say 2 solid core, whatever the manufacturer is, or if it's shutters, Mid-America, louvered shutters in the color blue. Be as specific, state colors. If you know size, that's fine too. Just go ahead and make sure that you have all of that in there so that it's clear to all the parties that are involved. And then once you do that, you go ahead and put in the cost or the credit in the field that goes in. The next thing you want to do is there is a field that asks for when the AWO is due. So this is a talking point because currently what we have in place is we've been asking for the AWO to be due with the next draw. We've played around with the idea of having AWOs due by the next weekly meeting. We were thinking that that might be a good strategy to have so that they don't pile up for so long, assuming the next draw is like so far away. And that way they don't pile up for so long and we can just get those AWO checks as they go, right? So that's one option. We can make that decision if that's what we want to do. But usually our standard is at the next draw. Again, we've talked about this previously. If it's a large amount, I don't want to wait till the next draw to collect that. If it's an AWO for $5,000, $7,000, I probably want to collect that sooner. So we can decide.
Sorry, especially if we need to buy equipment or buy materials or something like that, we of course then need to get that money as soon as possible to go to that vendor.
That's a very, very good point. AWOs are also customizable. Don't want us to do that all the time, but there are exceptions where that happens. I remember one client in the past that said, hey, I'd like to break up this. It was a large AWO for maybe $6 or $7 grand. And he says, I'd like to break this up into 2 draws, collect half with one draw and half with the next, because the draws are so close together. And it was fine. I was able to do that with them. So again, this is one that's case by case, but for the most part, we want to do it with the next draw at the absolute latest, preferably by the next weekly meeting. We can decide that. Okay.
Okay.
The other field that's really important for us to fill out in the AWOs is the time frame for which the additional work will extend the project. So you have to keep in mind that on the contract, we have a time frame where we're stating to the client that we're going to be finished in. So we're saying that this project is going to take us 12 to 15 weeks. Clients can hold us to that. A client can 100% hold us to that. If we are not finished in that time frame, it can be an issue. So we want to protect ourselves and we want to make sure that we're also meeting client expectations. Keeping in mind that when you add additional work, obviously it's going to take you longer to complete it because now there's more labor involved. So you want to account for that. it's up to the PM to assess how much longer the project will take when you've added that additional, and just please make sure that you put it in that time frame so that we can track that for that change. Okay.
Okay.
Last thing on the AWOs, you select the parties that are required to sign them and make sure they approve. There's going to be 2 people that need to approve the AWOs. One would be a Schroeder representative. That's typically the PD, but it can also be the PM, depending on who's posting it. Usually the PD is the one that we ask to do that, unless, say, your PD's out of town, you're handling the AWO for whatever reason, then obviously the PM can put themselves as the representative to sign it. The second person who should approve it is the client. So this one is a little weird because sometimes we have 2 clients in the system. I usually go for the client that's the most active in co-construct. So whatever client is that we've been dealing with, most times you'll see one more active than the other. So you'll see Leanne Alberts is always on co-construct, but not Brian. So then that would be the person that I would assign to approve it to. And then just let that client know, like, hey, I listed you as the approver. Please look at the AWO and approve it, so they know. Okay. Of course, to post the AWO, you hit send for approval. Just a few things to keep in mind. An AWO is approved when all the parties have approved it. We want the clients to approve it first before the SDB representative approves it. So we always want the client to make sure it's approved. We see that they've done that, and then we go in and do that. After all approvals are received, no changes can be made to the AWO. COCO does not allow us to make any changes after the AWO is approved. So if for whatever reason something happens and we've decided after an AWO is approved that it needs to be rescinded or changed or something of that nature, we can either do a second AWO reverting that or just void the approved AWO altogether, but it can't be changed after the fact. So keep that in mind. So what happens after the AWO is approved and all the parties have signed? The PDs have to put input when the AWOs are due in the construction schedule. How that happens is they look for the next draw. They go in there, like we've talked about in the previous training, and type in the amount of the AWOs that are going to be due at the next draw, and put that in the construction schedule so that the PM knows what to collect when they're going through the schedule. They can see it and they know what to collect. The PDs also have to code that AWO and send it over to accounting, which would be, for now, Beth, right? Because we're virtual, you don't have to print it out. You can just send it to her in an email saying, hey, here's coding for this AWO. It's now approved. Here you go. And then Beth will take it on from there. She has to enter it in QuickBooks and make sure that it's on the client's construction statement. So it's really, really important that she gets that information because she's tallying she's keeping a running balance of how much the client's going to owe us at the end. If she doesn't get that information, it doesn't go into that tally. So it's very important that she gets it. Questions about that?
Can I add something?
Mm-hmm.
Something we recently clarified too is that she also needs $0 AWOs.
Very good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Beth needs to receive coding for all AWOs, even the clarification AWOs. She has to document all of the changes in her construction statement and in QuickBooks. So any AWO, even if there's no dollars involved with it, it still has to go to Beth coded for the most part. Okay. Any questions? Good?
No, good.
All right. So last 2 items, clarifying roles. For the additional work order, the PM is responsible for accurately providing the scope of the additional work to the team, meaning to the PD. The PD is responsible for processing and posting the AWOs. Beth, or accounting, is responsible for tracking when those AWOs are due, which is why we ask the PDs to put that in the construction schedule, because what happens is it goes on Beth's AR report, and when those AWOs are due, she'll start looking for them, right, to make sure that we've collected them. The PD is responsible for equipping the PM to collect AWOs when they are due. So little things like making sure that it is posted in the construction schedule with the total amount will help the PM know that they need to collect that at their weekly meeting and have it with the client. Okay. Best practices, I'll just run through this one really quickly. All approved documents must be in the client binder. Our client binder is digital now. So what that means is just making sure that that AWO makes its way to accounting, makes its way to Beth. Very, very important. There should be a reliable system besides a verbal to notify field guys of changes to scope of work. This is a big one for me because we handle a lot of the changes in the office. The field guys are not in co-construct for the most part, and they have no way of knowing that a change has happened. It's very important that that communication goes all the way down the food chain to the field guys so that they're not sticking to the original scope when a change has happened. How do they get that information? That's on the project manager to make sure that that change gets to the field guys or their trade or whoever is associated with the change that's happening. We haven't had any huge issues with that, but every now and then it's crept up where a trade shows up with an outdated set of plans and doesn't know that a change has happened. So it's really, really important for the PDs and the PMs to work together to make sure everyone has it. If a PD is not ready to post an AWO, they can save it in draft mode, but please do not put any dollar amount in it because the clients can see AWO drafts. They can see it. So this is a really important one. If you're looking to start an AWO, because sometimes we have deadlines saying, hey, we want to have this posted by close of business today. So while the PD is waiting for some information back, she might start a draft and say, well, let me just get this draft started until I have everything I need. If you do that, please don't put any dollars in there. Clients can see it. And then if it goes back and changes later, it might be a conversation that they want to have with us.
So correct me if I'm wrong. If we do a draft, I don't think the clients can get in to actually see the draft additional work order, but they can see the label and the dollars from the summaries page. Is that correct?
Correct. They can see the title. So they'll see the draft title and they'll see the dollar amount associated with it if you put it in there.
So if we were to create a draft and then you put all the words in there and you put the actual dollar amount somewhere like in the draft text body so you can at least see what that is that the best course of action?
You can put it in the text body, just don't put it in the field that shows the dollars, please. Whatever you do, don't put that in there. The clients will see it and we don't want that.
Yeah, don't want to see it until it's finalized.
Right, absolutely. Okay, and then last 2 points we're gonna make. If a client changes their mind about a posted AWO, they need to go in and decline it. It's gonna be sitting there in limbo. Some clients assume that if they don't touch it, it'll go away. For clean accounting, clean processing, we need all of the posted AWOs to be attended to. So they either have to be approved or declined. So this is also one for the PDs to work with the PMs on. If an AWO has been hanging out there in the abyss and clients haven't touched it, approved it, it's just been sitting for a while, then we need to put that on the agenda for the next weekly meeting and keep putting it on the agenda and putting it on the agenda to get the client to do something with it, decline it or approve it. Okay. Last thing, if a client needs to make changes to an already approved AWO, we already talked about it. The existing AWO should be voided and a new one created because you cannot edit one that's already approved. So that's how Coco has it set up. You can post a new one to clarify or just void whatever they approved and do a whole new AWO. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah, I would recommend putting $1 million in as the price And then when you go to them, you can say, hey, I saved you $995,000. What do you want from me?
Nice try. That
I
might
mean,
work.
that's my standard. I'm going to start using that. See what happens.
Yes, let's see how the Trasks enjoy that for their bath fan.
Right.
That's a very small example, Andrew. I mean, we are having some other.
Yeah.
That's all right. Any other questions about AWS?
No.
So it seems straightforward, but there are things that we still miss in the field. If you have any questions that you're unsure of, please reach out to me, reach out to Andrew before you make a decision or commit to the client if you're not sure if it's an AWO or not. Just reach out to us if you're needing clarity.
I have a question for you, Salima.
Mm-hmm.
So if the PMs are working with the client and you figure out what's going to be an additional work order, whether it's additional work or unforeseen or whatever it's going to be, and then they work with the PDs and the PDs get that posted, and then the clients have questions or it's not as clean, like, so then what happens next? Like, do the PDs then talk to the PMs to go get that clarified, or do the PM or the PDs like post a message? Like, what happens then?
It depends on what the clarification is. So a good example that I can think about is Wisdom, Ariel. Like, we had a lot of back and forth with them because they were confused about what we were referencing when we posted it. If it's a language clarification, that's something that the PDs can answer. So like the client saying, I don't understand why we're being charged for the GFCI, it's already in contract. And we're saying, no, it's the actual wiring for it, not the blah, blah, blah. That's something that the PDs can clarify, no problem. If it's anything more than that, I think the PM should be the one having that conversation with the client, get it clarified, get the PDs to make any edits they need to, and then move forward from there.
But what if the PMs have already clarified and even then they are coming back and seeking for those clarifications, like just recently happened at Trask with Jennifer with that price hike in lumber?
If the clients are coming back for clarification, then it's not clear to them. It's not clear. So in this case, we've added one more body, like we talked about. Pull in your DOP. Maybe it might help if it's coming from a different vessel. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You never know. But I would say reach out to your DOP and have them get involved and see if they can talk to the client. In this case, sales is the one handling that, so
yeah,
that also works.
I had two additional like kind of best practices to add.
Mm-hmm.
One would be for the PDs. So as you know, that there's a whole bunch of different fields in the additional work order between like the scope of work field and then the dollars and then the time added to the job and then when the payment is due. And so the best practice is like, I've done a bunch of these and it's been a little while, but I've done a bunch of these. And if you have a lot to do, then you end up to kind of buzz through the whole thing. But I would suggest making sure that each one of those steps is a deliberate step, just a checkbox, even if it hits our standard, like adds one day and collect the dollars at next payment, checkbox, you're thinking about it. But if it is, if you have any questions on like, should we be collecting this sooner than the next payment because we just collected a payment and the next payment's not for 3 weeks, and any questions, go to the PM and ask that. So then you're strategic on that. That would be best practices number one. The second best practices I would suggest is any dollars that are unforeseen, client not expecting to be charged extra, the first time they hear about it or see it should not be a posted additional work order. It should always be a phone call or an in-person meeting discussed with the client. So as you can imagine, if you were a customer somewhere, the last thing you want to get is an email pop-up come through for $500 extra that you have to spend that you've never heard about. Like that would definitely not go over very well. As we did 2 extras that I noticed.
I agree. it's gonna be a difficult conversation either way. Sometimes clients are cool about it because they know these things happen, but regardless, it's not a conversation that anyone likes. No client wants to spend more money if they don't have to, right? And the PMs are in an awkward situation where they want to keep the client happy, but this is important work that needs to be done. Let's not blindside the client. Let's not just do it.
Yeah, I guess, and the next iteration of that best practice is going to be, if you get a tone that they feel upset, that should be, the next response should be a call, not another message. Or if you've tried, if you post up the additional work order that they're already expecting and they get back to you and they need clarifications and you respond back to them with that clarification and they respond again and still don't get it, then no more messages. That needs to be in person or phone call to clarify, or Zoom call or whatever it is to clarify. At some point, messages don't, if they're not conveying what you need them to convey, you got to move on.
Yeah, they're a little impersonal. Sometimes you just want to hear the client's voice, and sometimes it's good for them to hear yours. So they have, like, sometimes it's a trust thing, so they understand where you're coming from versus just sending an email. Email seems to be like the most convenient thing, or Coco message. It doesn't always work as the best way to do this. So
Salima, I would say if you sense that the client might be upset or not understand, like further clarification is needed. You might just need to talk it through with them. And then just the last thing to address with additional work orders, as everybody knows, a lot of the projects that we do for clients is the largest purchase they've ever made outside of their house. And some of the projects we do are cost even more than their original house when they purchased it. So this is a very stressful time because it's a big investment that everybody has. So always put yourself in their moccasins and just make sure you feel free.
One last thing, if you have approved an AWO that adds time to your schedule, please let the keeper of the pulse know because they will add it.
well, the keeper of the pulse will know because the keeper of the pulse will be the one putting it in the field that says at a time. Yeah.
Not if a PM is doing it. If a PM is creating a purchase order and posting it, or another PD is doing it, then
So what's the protocol then? Say that gets approved and say we just added more, like also refinish hardwoods in this area or do more recessed lights or do more painting or something. Let's say we add 4 days worth of work. So then what's the next protocol once that gets approved, not only to update the pulse, but to update the actual schedule?
the PMs are responsible for making sure that update happens to the construction schedule. So they're the ones feeding the PD with the information of how much longer it will take. They're giving the PD that information. As soon as the PM knows that that's approved, they should go in and update their COCO schedules because that work is going to get done.
So that needs to somehow, because I think, following that up, when then the PM would then get to the next production meeting, and give an update on the job. Well, the job length, the job completion just got moved back 1 week, which is kind of what Elizabeth was implying.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because we just added, painting hardwoods and recesses and whatever else that we're doing.
Yes, should be part of
that
it.
would be the completion of that communication.
Yes, agree. All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
This was really
I
good.
will send this out in the email as usual, along with the video. If you have any more edits from me, just let me know and I'll make those changes. Thank you guys all for your feedback. This one was really interactive. I enjoyed this one.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, can you stay for
Thank you.
5 minutes, please?
Thank you.
yeah.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.